is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Yes, I want the box, and I'll leave with that if it's all I can get. I came looking for something more, and I think I found it.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
Stop that! Everything in here is organized.
Yeah, disorganized.
I have a system.
So do I.
You, sir, have a method. Not a system or anything resembling a process.
Ezra? Hi, Hera.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Kenobi. This is your weekly spoiler-free place for Star Wars community and conversation. I'm your host, Dan Zayer, delighted to talk Star Wars with each and every one of you. Since May of 2013, whether you're a fan of Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action and animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars opportunities at the Disney theme parks, on Coffee with Kenobi, you're among friends as we virtually share a cup of coffee while talking about this galaxy far, far away. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefan-travel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zayer sent you. On today's show, we discuss the final episode of Ahsoka. The episode is the 8th episode in this incredible series, and I am joined once again by Ross Hollebon and Jen Sopchockchai. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. Joining us today for a cup of coffee as we break down the last episode in, do I say season 1? I don't know. I'm just going to say the last episode of Ahsoka as of 2023. I am joined as always by my co-pilots as we traverse the Ghost and explore this amazing Disney Plus series. First, Balin's beard himself, Ross Hollebon. Ross, welcome back, buddy.
Thank you. The beard has not been shaved since the series began, so I'm very proud of that. Maybe a little trimming, but you know that's going to happen when you have lightsabers involved.
That's right. That's right. Well, it looks wonderful. Well done. You're really good with a lightsaber. Also joining us, she may be lost in Peridia, but she has found her place as a wonderful co-host as we've explored Ahsoka. Jen Sopchockchai. Jen, welcome back.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Ross. Thanks. I cannot believe we're at the end of this journey already. It's very surreal.
These 2 months have flown by. They really, really have. Let's do what we always do. Of course, we're going to talk about this episode. This is episode 8. If you have not seen episode 8 yet, the episode is titled "The Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord." Please pause it and come back when you have finished. But if you have seen it, we're going to be talking spoilers about this final episode of Ahsoka. Ross, let's start with you. Give your one word to describe the episode and kind of overall thoughts on it.
I am starting heavy here. So the Latin word for death, mortis. And I think this is very dual purpose throughout this episode, as we have stormtroopers coming back to life. We have witches imbibing things. And we get to see a couple items at the very end of the episode that may very well bring up some things from the Clone Wars.
So you liked it?
I liked it.
I wish you could have seen his face. Jen, what about you? One word and overall thoughts on the episode.
My word is fairy, and that is not like spelled like the tooth fairy. It's spelled Faerie.
R-I-E.
Yes. And to me, I mean, the way that I landed on fairy was because of the title of the episode, which evokes The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and sort of going into another fantasy world. And so that sort of led me down the path of Tolkien's definition of fairy from his essay on fairy stories. And I will get to that. We'll have full academic corner later. That's just a tease for what's coming later. But to me, this episode really opens up a whole world. And we get not that many answers. We have many more questions, and it feels in a lot of ways less a finale and more of a beginning, which is sort of what Balin wanted, I guess. So, and to me, that's all because we have opened up this world where 4 of our core characters now remain.
Okay, I want to tell you something really quickly on fairy stories, Tolkien. That is actually the first major lecture I ever gave as a teacher on that essay.
Amazing.
So, yes, he loved dragons. I can't wait to talk about it. That'll be fun. My word, I'm kind of vacillating between two. I'm gonna say Everdeen is my word. Everdeen is the last name of Katniss Everdeen. From a book series called The Hunger Games, which I'm sure many of our listeners know. And the reason I'm using that word is not because of the heroine, but my problem with The Hunger Games is that I felt like each of the novels was never complete. And I found that to be challenging and frustrating. And the unresolved nature of it, I almost used the word unresolved. But I've watched it a number of times since it aired yesterday. And I don't know that it's unresolved, but I feel like it's incomplete. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that a lot. So let's just kick it off. I've got a lot of critiques, but I'm going to say those for the second half of the show. I really want to focus on the glorious nature of this episode, not the series per se, but just the episode in general. Ross, when the episode starts, it's mostly about Thrawn. Eventually we get to see Ezra constructing his lightsaber. I love to know not only Ross, of course, but Jen, your thoughts too on that sequence, what we learn from Hu Yang, and just Ezra's construction of a new lightsaber.
I mean, I thought how excited you must have been, especially when Hu Yang was, oh, I saved this. I had 2 of these. One went to Caleb, and the other is now for you. So just those opportunities, Sabine being able to tell Hu Yang that Ezra's master was Kanan Jarrus, and Hu Yang putting it all together, and just kind of the chaos that is Ezra when he's doing something that we got to see from his Lothal penthouse atop that tower way back in the day. Is he's a little bit of a clutterer, and that's how he works. And it really drove Hu Yang nuts, but what a special way to introduce that without it being super heavy.
Jen?
I think in general, they've really done the character of Kanan Jarrus in the series, even though he's not present in the series, justice, because I feel like between the moment when Carson learns about Kanan Jarrus, right, that whole scene where he's explaining that how Jason has abilities, between that and this, where it's like Kanan's is not really gone. That's the feeling that those scenes give us, I think, and that you can see that in Ezra's face. Like once they start talking about Kanan and he realizes that Hu Yang knew him, you can see his face light up, like he's reconnecting with him, and that he's never really gone, and that he's still here. And we also see, right, that he's never really gone because he lives on through Ezra, right? That because he trained Ezra has so much of him in him, even though Hu Yang quibbles about how he has a method but not a process. I love the bickering between the two of them in that scene, and it was very accurate to, like, if you know anyone who has like a garage with a bunch of tools in it, and they have a system, quote unquote, that they're very protective over. I thought that felt very authentic. But yeah, it was a really wonderful way. What better way for Ezra to rebuild a new lightsaber than to have a piece of Kanan in it?
You probably heard me yelling across the country when I saw that part, because when he finds the top part, I'm like, yes. And Mason goes, Dad, there it is. And I said, that's my favorite. Kanan's lightsaber is probably my favorite lightsaber, or number 2. And I just like the top part, which I noticed that Shin's is also like that too, which you can see at the end when she holds it up. So who knows? But I love that. There was a part of me that was like, usually the building of a lightsaber is a very sacred spiritual thing that takes time. They don't have time. Ezra needs to build a lightsaber. He clearly wants Sabine to keep hers, which we see more on that a little bit later. I must confess, I was wondering where a blue kyber crystal came from. Unless
does he just have a drawer of them? Hu Yang has a drawer
which
spare
would be,
kyber crystals.
Yeah, which would be really contrary to the whole concept of getting the kyber crystals, unless this is Ezra's blue kyber crystal from his first lightsaber. I mean, just because that initial one was destroyed doesn't mean the kyber crystal was destroyed too.
Right.
So I don't know. That's probably something that I'll just have to let go of, because I usually don't go into that direction. But I thought, wow. But I was happy because it looks similar to Kanan's, and it's blue. And blue is the lightsaber I built when I did my Jedi training in Galaxy's Edge, when I built my own lightsaber. So I like that. I like the conversation between Hu Yang and Ezra, and we finally get an explanation about what happened between Sabine and Ahsoka. So Jen, I mean, to me that really puts the pieces together. From a narrative perspective, I would have liked to have seen a little bit of evidence of that. Maybe we'll get sort of a prequel to Ahsoka and get to see more of how that kind of falls into place, because it's not like it happened just overnight, or maybe it did. Either way, did you find that to be satisfying?
I did, and I think it was different than what we had assumed or when we tried to fill in the blanks earlier, when Baylan had made the comment. I believe it was an episode. I'm gonna get the number wrong. Two. It was very early in the season where he's saying, your master didn't trust you, and that's why your family died. And so we knew that there was a history there, but we didn't know the particulars of it. And I feel like this explanation to me makes a lot of sense in the context of Ahsoka, because of what happened to Anakin, that she would be extra wary of someone giving into their fear and their hate and their grief, and then turning to the dark side. So I think, to me, it seemed like much better explanation than I had in my head up until that we got that explanation. And I also feel like it helps us understand how their dynamic got the way it did between Ahsoka and Sabine. Because I think that scene with Ezra narratively serves another purpose. It's not just about Ezra and Kanan. It's about, how different Ahsoka and Sabine's master and apprentice relationship is, right? And Sabine gets really upset, right? Because she sees that even from the grave, Kanan has this huge positive influence on Ezra, and that they had such a strong bond. Hu Yang's very, very passive aggressively is like, well, aren't you a good student? and you can't help but think that he's sort of implying that Sabine has not been, right? So yeah, to me, I was satisfied. It filled in blanks in a way that made sense.
I feel like Star Wars does exposition better than almost any myth, and it always serves the story. And I never feel like we're at a standstill with it. And I like that Hu Yang's sort of whole aura changed once he knew it was Kanan, because then there was a respect there. And also it's like, okay, this is why you are who you are, and there's complete acceptance of that. Ross, what about you? I know you, of course, as we keep saying, you were the resident Sabine expert here and massive fan. Did this part work for you?
Yeah, it worked, and it tied together with what's been alluded to as well. So being able to hear that come out and have Sabine, she has walked away. She doesn't want to talk about anything. She's clearing out. And that's the nice part, is that she's going out. And as that story has just taken place without her, it transitions immediately into her and Ahsoka working their way through things. And this wiser, enlightened Ahsoka talking through her, who's been through this journey on her own about her own master. And we get to revisit that multiple times during this episode as well. So I think how they put all those pieces together flowed very nicely right into some TIE fighters.
And I really like that moment before the two TIEs show up, where Ahsoka is like, my master always supported me no matter what. And he did. We've seen that. We've got plenty of evidence to support that, empirical evidence. And then she's like, I'm going to be there for you. And Sabine just sort of gives this look. She doesn't her shoulders don't fall down in relief, but it's more like there's peace there. There's not, I don't think there was ever really animosity. Well, Sabine certainly had animosity the first episode or two. But Ahsoka is more at peace with who she is. And I like the idea of them sticking together. And of course, that we get to see that come full circle towards the end of the episode too. I want to transition briefly to Morgan Elsbeth, and we can discover anything with Morgan Elsbeth through this entire episode. One of my students today said, it's not fair that one girl, this is him describing it, that one girl got all those powers in that sword and then she just dies right away. What was the point of her? And I had thoughts on that, but Ross, what do you think? What do you think about that particular student's criticism?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's almost the warning that Baylan gave to Shin in the previous episode, because everything was a power grab. I'm going to keep growing. I'm going to keep growing. I'm going to gain more power. And then, so as that was going through, and as I was going through my second watch, one of my favorite bands is a punk band called Bad Religion. And they have a song called No Control. And it talks about, you think you're in control of your destiny. You think that you're making your own way. You have no control. You are not in command. And that's what happened here. All of a sudden, she kept growing and getting these opportunities. And then, you know what? Once again, you're a pawn for Thrawn.
I never thought I'd say this, but justice for Morgan Elsbeth. Because the second the Great Mothers were saying, you will be rewarded, I was like, oh no, this is not good. And what really interesting how her last words almost are for Dathomir, right?
Yes.
Not for the Empire. So I thought that was cool because it was like the magic that they gave her actually completely had her switch her allegiance away from Thrawn. So I thought I was actually really hopeful. I was like, ooh, this is juicy, because if she sticks around, which I was doubtful at that point, but I'm like, if she sticks around, then we're going to get this like interesting subterfuge where like Thrawn thinks that she's working for him, but she's really working for the witches. But then she just got it. But we got the cool green flame sword of Mother Talzin.
Yeah.
So,
and the gift of the shadows and that name of the sword, as soon as they were like Sword of Talzin, I was just like, oh my God, Mother Talzin, this is awesome.
I'm interested in your perspective there, because I never, when she says for Dathomir, I didn't think that was her possessed self, talking about Dathomir so much as that was always her plan. I feel like she was in it for both of them, and somehow through their connection, because they say that, she called them from through dreams, right, across galaxies, that I think she was always working for the both of them, and she was equally parts Dathomirian as well as she was subservient to Thrawn. Justice is fair. She's definitely not a sympathetic character, but there was a part of me when he said to her, hey, you're going to stay behind and you're going to make sure we have a safe exit. And I mean, at that moment, the red in Thrawn's eyes become like a glowing example of him being a parasite, right? And he doesn't care about her. Of course, he only cares about, I know he says for the Empire, I think he cares about his ego more than his empire. And I think he wants to reshape the empire into his own image. And hopefully we'll get to see how that plays out.
Her fight scene with Ahsoka
So
is
awesome.
easily the best
She's
in the episode.
great. She's great. She's such a good actor, and she's such a good swordsman. And that's why I told my student, so one of the reasons you got to see this is because she's awesome in real life. And her, her lineage to Bruce Lee, I mean, is through the family is pretty inherent there. I thought that whole sequence with her and Ahsoka fighting was absolutely tremendous. The sort of talisman was a great little add-on to that. But I thought she served a purpose. I thought her purpose was to not only show that Thrawn has no allegiance except to himself, but everyone is so loyal to him. Now, why is that? Why do we think that the witches and Thrawn have this partnership? Because the witches are clearly powerful enough that they don't need Thrawn, or do they need Thrawn? I mean, personally, I think that he promised the witches, because they say that he awakened them. I think he promised them, I will get you to Dathomir, but you got to help me. That's my theory. It's never said, and I could be wrong, but that's just sort of how I didn't think of it the first time, but the second time through, I thought this must be the connection.
Yeah, and I think that's completely it. And I think they could also be playing each other. Once the Night Sisters, if, and this is that evil S word, if everything that they're transporting out could potentially be other witches to awaken as well, they're going to have a very powerful army and starting that up again. And at that point, are they still going to be concerned about Thrawn, or are they willing to make their sacrifices now just to get back the same way he is?
Yeah, to me, it seemed like he offered them a chance to restore their former glory on Dathomir. And then they're also hyping him up to be like, we all serve you, right? So I think, and what was so fun and interesting about the Night Sisters in the Clone Wars was that they kind of were their own side. They weren't necessarily allied with the Sith, and they were kind of this weird in-between entity that was very powerful. And so I'd like to think that they're going to continue to be kind of a complicated figure. But I think, to go back to what we were saying about the sacrifice of Morgan Elsbeth, and I also think of when Thrawn says to Enoch, to give all the captains of the TIE fighters or like the troopers that died, give them demerits, or like what citations he uses.
Yes.
Something very bureaucratic. But I think both of those moves to me are ways that the show is illustrating or reminding us that, remember, the Empire thrives on treating all of their members as disposable, right? That everybody is hungry for power and ambitious and wants to go up the ranks, but at the same time, for the people who are highest in power, like Thrawn, everybody is pretty disposable, and that's how it functions.
Yes, and yet people still sign up. I mean, we get that the stormtroopers, because they make it very clear. Do these night troopers, are they aware of what they're going to do? And she says, yes, they're all willing to sacrifice. And he says, long live the Empire. There are a couple of key moments with Thrawn in this episode where he shows other emotions besides stoic smugness. And he looks legitimately nervous and concerned, dare I say scared, when Ahsoka is charging in the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker, that will be no negotiating with. And I love that, especially because the word negotiation, aggressive negotiations with a lightsaber, we know very well what that means. And then we actually see him smile at one point really, really quickly towards the end too. And I think it's when he leaves Morgan Elsbeth, isn't it? Is that the time I'm thinking of?
He may have a smirk.
It's really quick.
He has the last word with Ahsoka, and he's very smug during that whole monologue.
He sure is.
But I love that.
And you can tell
I love what he says there too, and I don't know if we'll get to that a little bit later.
Let's do it now. We don't need to go chronologically. Go ahead.
Yeah. How similar will you become?
Right? And it was, Thrawn says, I know you because I know your master. I concluded your strategies would be similar. One wonders just how similar you might become. And then it's beautiful because they use the perhaps with a short pause, which is such a Thrawn thing.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps this is where a Ronin such as you belongs. That's just, and that close up on Rosario playing Ahsoka is just brilliant. And it's like a slow pan in of just that son of a gun. He's doing this right now.
He knows how to pull those threads, pull those strings, or try to. I still, well, what do you think, Jen?
Well, I think so. I've heard a lot of criticism of this finale, and as emblematic of sort of criticisms people have of the entire series, of that it's. I was listening to NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour the other day and was crestfallen to hear how harsh they were on this show.
Oh,
and
wow.
and one of the two hosts said that it was sluggish and that boring and nothing happened and that people just stared off into the distance. There was no conflict. And so it to me, my sort of dissatisfaction with this episode as a finale is that we didn't really quite get enough Balin, I think, to really be satisfying. And I'm sure we'll circle back to him in a little while. But I think, to me, what has a lot of resolution is all of the character conflicts. So with internal conflicts the characters have with themselves and the ones they have with each other. And I keep thinking, was there a way to sort of front load a lot of this, right? Because like the explanation of what really happened on Mandalore and between Ahsoka and Sabine that we just talked about, and Thrawn sort of like really, really needling Ahsoka about Anakin, I feel like a lot of that is very illuminating in terms of the character arcs that these characters have been on all season. But if you aren't already kind of like really familiar with these characters, should those have been moments that we got much earlier in the season was sort of where I was left wondering. So curious what you think about that.
Well, that's definitely something I've been talking about through these last few months. That's challenging for me because I think if we're going to get conflicts, and I agree with you, I think the emotional conflicts, the internal conflicts are resolved. I still maintain that Ahsoka does grow. She certainly grows in this. She has this persistent thing that we see in The Mandalorian. She won't train Grogu because she's afraid of what attachment will do, right? And because she's seen that happen with her master, as we all know. And then here we learn that she leaves Sabine because she's afraid Sabine's going to be a Jedi for the wrong reasons and try to get revenge because all of her people were massacred, as we've seen in The Mandalorian with the Great Purge. So that is an internal conflict that she has. That is some doubt that she has. Thrawn does pull on that at the end. I would like to see more outward displays of it. It may affect her introspective nature and some choices she makes, but it does not affect her behavior. And I'm not a psychologist, so maybe that's all part and parcel of how that works. I vehemently, adamantly disagree with the folks at NPR on that. And I've never heard the Pop Culture. I'm sure it's awesome. I'm sure I would love it. But I think a lot happens. I think that's pretty short-sighted criticism. And I think I just don't. I don't agree with that at all. I think things happen. I don't think as much happens as we want or as we would like. But at the end of the day, Ezra Bridger is back in Star Wars. That's huge. That is huge. I do think it's fair to, and I guess we'll just address this now. I think it's fair that I've heard a lot of people say, and I'm sure that both of you have as well, well, if you didn't watch Rebels, should you care about this? Is there enough here to kind of give you, and I'm paraphrasing and amalgamizing a lot of different criticisms I've heard about this. Is it fair to emotionally invest in something if you don't have the background information on these characters? Are they properly introduced? Sabine is. I think Ezra is, for what we are told and what we get from him. Ahsoka is Ahsoka. And I think of every Star Wars that's been done, and I may have said this last week, I can't remember, of every Star Wars that's been done since Disney took over, they've all been self-contained, but they all feed from a larger story. So they all work individually, but they also work as a greater whole. Does Ahsoka function that way? I don't know. It's very, very difficult for me to unlearn what I have learned and to be able to answer that question. It's a fair criticism, but I also think it's fair to say, when it comes to Marvel and many other pop cultural things and mythological stories and concepts, most of them depend on other things too. The genius of Star Wars is that you can do them in alone or together. This one is probably more dependent on prior knowledge of Star Wars than anything else, but that in and of itself isn't so bad. I would think it's weird. Like if I want to watch Ahsoka and I'm not familiar with Star Wars, and then I'm going to complain I don't know what's going on, that doesn't work for me either. Why don't you just, instead of reading chapter 8 or 9, why don't you go back and read chapters 1 through 7 first, and then we can talk.
Yeah, and I think
oh, go ahead, Jen.
This finale shows that issue exacerbated, and I think it veered, especially with just the final scenes. It veers much more, and with the Mortis God references that Ross alluded to at the beginning, like I feel like it veers much more in terms of there's more here for you if you're already familiar with all the other stories, versus, because I think I cringed when they just showed Balin and nothing else, like just standing on the cliff and nothing else, and we stopped there. I was like, no, because I'm like, there's so many people who are going to be like, what was the point of that? And really confused and kind of dissatisfied because we didn't see anything. We didn't see him find anything or start to find anything, or like we didn't see what it's all implied. And I think this issue of like the story being implicit versus explicit, I've loved it being implicit because I'm interpreting everything and sort of reading between the lines and sort of using what I know about the previous stories and these characters to piece the puzzle together. But with each episode, I sort of got increasingly concerned with those who aren't coming to it with that. Right. And I feel like as a finale of a season of television, regardless of whether or not it's Star Wars, there are going to reasonably be people who were like, this show didn't give me enough to really know what I want from season 2. And that I would understand why they had that opinion.
I think there's a little bit of David Lynch and his storytelling approach that comes into this. And you have to be very patient for Lynch. And there are some parts where it's just like, what's he doing here? And sometimes it does take a little bit of a reach to get there. And I think that's there. I think with the patience, and Dan, as you alluded to, try to get some background info. Try to get, even if you don't watch everything beforehand, what can you pick up that way? And yeah, there's a little bit of effort to go do that, but there's a great payoff for it as well. And I don't need everyone to like it the same way that I did. No. I would love it if they did, but I love that the 3 of us get to do it. That the 9 of us on our text thread since, 7 a.m. this morning have been texting like, did you watch? Have you checked in yet? And that's how the entire day goes. I love that. And that's this community. Those NPR people are not part of this community or the extended community. They're media critics. So they have their right to look at it that way. I love what Filoni did. I love what Rick Famuyiwa did with this episode. Do I wish I saw a little bit more? Yes. But I still love almost everything they did with this.
I love it. I'm a little lukewarm on how much I like it. I guess we'll just talk about the things that are challenging now. And Jen, you alluded to them. I think the challenge for me as a fan of story and storytelling is just like I said before. A story well told has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Some things are tied up. I don't need everything resolved. I understand that things can progress to a future story. That's cool. But and some of the greatest stories ever told, including A New Hope, by the way, you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. Sure, there are things that are out there that you can expand upon and create a larger, more all-encompassing story. But similar to my challenges with what did Ahsoka actually learn in a world between worlds that's legitimate and earned narratively. Now we have the first sequence in episode 1 of Ahsoka is Baylan and Shin. And we get these wonderful little sprinkles throughout. We follow the bouncing ball to, they have orange lightsabers. They're different Jedi. They're not Sith. They're not Jedi. They're something else. They have another plan. They're mercenaries. They have another plan. Then in episode 7, Dreams of Madness, we learn that Baylan and Shin are going to separate, and that Baylan has plans that are bigger than a silly little empire and all this kind of stuff, and recycling these conflicts. And then they separate. Okay, and we all know this. So then I'm watching this episode, and all of a sudden they show Baylan, and I swear to you, they show Baylan and they show Shin, and I said to Mason, I completely forgot these characters existed. Like, I completely did. Whereas like a few hours before I was ready to order the Black Series figures to them, and then I was just so sort of ensconced in the narrative that I was presented that I forgot they existed. So then Shin goes up where those Marauders are, and she ignites her lightsaber, and that's it. I saw a great criticism online from Jay Soderbergh, who's a podcasting legend. Hey, Jay, good to hope you're doing well, my friend. He said, why didn't Shin go with Thrawn if she wants power? That's a great question. Does she just want to kind of reinvent herself? Like all of her training from this elegant Baylan skull, and she wants to just hang out with a bunch of Marauders and be in charge of their group. It's like the Marauders in Guardians of the Galaxy. But worse than that, and to me, exponentially magnified because of the real loss of Ray Stevenson, who's of course no longer with us. God rest his soul. All of this thing that we've seen, all this stuff, he's so integral to the plot, and he's standing on a mountain, and we've got two of the Mortis statues behind us. We get to see the Convor earlier, talking to Ahsoka very briefly, but that's it. And knowing, because this was made well before the writer's strike, well before the passing of Ray Stevenson. I've seen him after they filmed Ahsoka. So they could have put stuff in there, and they didn't. So now if we're going to continue his story, we'll have to have a different actor, or they just won't address it at all, in which case he didn't serve a purpose in the story besides a couple of cool lightsaber fights. And that to me is a disservice to the narrative. And that, as a literary critic, as a teacher, as a fan, that frustrates me.
Well,
So
and I think
this is where. Oh, go ahead, Ross. My thing's long, so I can go.
Okay. So, and what I'm going to say it here, and this may be too blunt. This may just be a full sledgehammer, quick sentence.
I like it already.
Ahsoka at the end with Sabine says, Ezra's where he needs to be, and so are we. To me, that says, okay, everything has aligned correctly here. And now you've seen all the pieces are set. Baylan, from the time this started, he was like, I need to get here. So like everyone who had a goal to get somewhere got to where they were going. So to me, that does fulfill what was happening. And there's still a much larger story to go. But if you look at it that way, it is just like every one of them found what they wanted except maybe Shin. And maybe her power is just overseeing a group because now she's been abandoned by Baylan and abandoned by Thrawn when the troopers were called off, and she wasn't included in that. So she has her own thing to deal with. But that's how I'm looking at it, just in terms of, okay, something big's still going to happen there, is my estimation. And Ahsoka and Sabine are meant to be there. Ezra's meant to be back and is going to play a role there. And we're going to see how it all plays out eventually in the film from Filoni. But I think a lot of the emptiness at the end was not knowing if there's another season of Ahsoka coming. Well,
To me, it's purely Ray Stevenson's gone. So if that's so important, I mean, you get that, I get that, Jen gets that, people listening get that, because we love Clone Wars and the Mortis trilogy is legendary. But otherwise, all this time, I said earlier, look, do some backstory to appreciate it if that's your main criticism. That's not my main criticism. I'm saying as a fan of storytelling, and I know Jen's about to wax poetic and hopefully put me at ease, maybe not. There's no resolution there. That's not great little, there's more stories to tell. That's just not effective storytelling. And the example people always give me when I criticize Hunger Games, because I do. I used to, when it first came out, I criticized the heck out of it. I read them. They frustrated me because they didn't have beginning, middles, and end. And people said, what about Lord of the Rings? What about Lord of the Rings? Tolkien wrote one book. His editors forced him to cut it into thirds. He didn't want to do it, but he did it. That's why the end of, Fellowship of the Ring ends so abruptly. That because that is what the editors did. So that had to work because he didn't have a choice. That wasn't his choice to tell the story. This was the story, as far as I know, that was told to be told, was intended to be told. And again, I'm satisfied with the Ahsoka and Sabine part to a degree. I mean, Ahsoka went out of her way, even so much as willing to sacrifice never seeing Ezra again, so that Thrawn would not return. Thrawn does return. She doesn't seem the least bit worried about it. I mean, there's Zen, and then there's apathy. And I don't know. I need to kind of reflect on that a little bit. But I was a little bit like, isn't Ahsoka at least want to get back?
I think she realizes that fear of someone going to the dark side or making the wrong choice is as dangerous as fear itself, letting fear itself lead to
completely.
The dark side. So I
agree.
But she doesn't really say that. So I can sort of see how.
And I agree with that, but it's more like, does she not want to fight Thrawn? Does she not want to get back? I mean, she's got the Purgil's phone number. She can have them come back.
Well, okay, so this is the interesting thing, and this is totally sidetracking from what I originally was planning. So we're going to circle back to what I had originally planned. But
okay.
The Purgle, they establish, I think, pretty clearly that it's a one-way trip for them, because it's like they migrate and then they die. And so I think that was the show's way of being like, we can't just, the Purgles are not just Ubers that you can call at any time. Like we have to, like they have a migration pattern that they have to follow, and they don't generally go back the other direction. That said, we have a bunch of Purgles who, because Ahsoka asked them to, didn't necessarily like. I don't know if the group of Purgle that we came with during the series are going to die. And Sabine at the end says, "I see shadows in the starlight." Mm-hmm. And since in the earlier episodes, that's sort of how we first introduced the Purgle, is they're just like little floating shadows in the clouds. I was like, oh wait, so are the Purgle coming back?
I thought that too. So circle back to what you were going to say about my long tirade about the Balin conundrum.
Yes,
sounds like a Big Bang Theory episode title.
And so I wanted to make sure Academic Corner didn't get squeezed in at the end like it has for the past couple of weeks. But for me, what I was thinking about for Academic Corner really explains where we end this episode and this series with, and sort of explains, doesn't necessarily excuse, but explains some of what we're talking about in terms of like where we end. So the title of this episode is a riff on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? A novel by C.S. Lewis. And at the end of that novel, there are 4 characters who remain in Narnia. They're sort of stuck there, and they grow up and have these epic adventures, and they kind of part ways. It's been a minute since I've read it, but they sort of like go off and have their own kingdoms, or like they come into their own in Narnia. And then it's just like by happenstance, they all kind of crawl back through the wardrobe, and then they're kids again. And so to me, I was like, oh, we have 4 characters on Peridia kind of all off pursuing their own adventures. Will we then, like, is the point that we will then kind of have them reconvene later once Balin discovers whatever he's trying to find, once Shin becomes the queen of the Marauders, and once Ahsoka and Sabine presumably finish Sabine's training and are ready again. So like, is that sort of the point? And that's what brought me to this concept of fairy, because Narnia, I think Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were colleagues. They were part of a group of writers called the Inklings. They went to the pub every week and had writers' workshops and stuff like that. And they both gave lectures on this idea of the fairy story. And so to me, like Narnia seems like would be included as this idea of fairy. And so Tolkien makes the whole point of his essay on fairy stories is to be like, we're not really talking about what people think of when they hear the word fairy tale. Like, it's not like children's stories. And both Lewis and Tolkien their whole kind of mission as scholars was to have people take quote unquote children's stories seriously. That fantasy at the time was considered just for kids and not really a serious form of literature. And so he says stories about fairy, and he spells it with a Y, that is fairy, and he changes the spelling to Aerie, the realm or state in which fairies have their being. Fairy contains many things besides elves and fays, and besides dwarves, witches, trolls, giants, or dragons. It holds the seas, the sun, the moon, the sky, and the earth, and all the things that are in it, tree and bird, water and stone, wine and bread, and ourselves, mortal men, when we are enchanted. Most good fairy stories, so the good ones, are about the adventures of men in the perilous realm and upon its shadowy marshes. So to me, Peridia is a perfect candidate for this, as a place where our characters, our heroes, right, depending on where your mileage on Balin and Shin, where they go into this perilous realm, and then they'll kind of return back to our primary galaxy when the time is right. And in the line, The Witch in the Wardrobe, and this is where I'll finish, I think. They say, and so the narrator says, and so for a time, it looked as if all the adventures were coming to an end, but that was not to be. And so to me, that really just explains where we are with this series right now, is that Dave Filoni is really playing the long game in terms of like, no, this is just the beginning. This is the beginning of this adventure these 4 characters are going to go on.
And I have no doubt about any of that. And I love I had a lot of wonderful flashbacks. I can still see my individual students' faces when I was student taught them, because that was the first lesson I did with that class. And when we talked about those things, some of the things that you quoted, so thank you for giving me that little memory. The problem with this is still, and this includes C.S. Lewis and his stories too, and Tolkien's stories too, and J.K. Rowling's incredible Harry Potters. Those are really steeped in lore and whatever, but each individual one is self-contained within itself, and it wraps everything up. This didn't really wrap a lot up. I mean, sure, figuratively, maybe to a degree, metaphorically, but I can't imagine that casual observers or even people who like Star Wars were going to feel like, oh yeah, Shin and Balin had a point. Because if the point is just for them to float off into the ether, and that's just frustrating to me. It didn't feel
like a finale. It definitely didn't feel like a finale.
It felt like the last 2 episodes were they felt a little rushed. Like I don't know what the original plan is. Maybe it was always 8. And I almost feel guilty for critiquing it, because I did really like it. I mean, are you kidding me? I think Ahsoka has felt the most Star Wars since George Lucas retired from telling Star Wars stories. I mean, I love this. I love this series. I love it, love it, love it. And I will evangelize about it forever. But I find this aspect really unsatisfying and frustrating to me as a fan of story. Now, does that make sense? I mean, I can sort of defend it too. But...
I think it does. I think the other sort of contextual factor that sort of, for me at least, helps clarify why we ended the way that we did is one, as sort of like the evolution of television. Because to me, on the one hand, this series has felt the most like a television series out of all the Disney Plus Star Wars shows that we've had so far, right? Because Obi-Wan Kenobi was, it had, people are still debating, even though Ewan McGregor and Deborah Chow are like, we're not making any more of these, there's still discussion about if there could be a season 2, but the way that show was constructed from the get-go was as a limited series, right? Like a contained arc that was told in a serial fashion. This to me feels like season 1 of Game of Thrones, where we're like table setting, putting everybody on the chessboard to continue for like 8 more seasons. Which, as a fan, excites me. Thrawn's chessboard, right?
No, that's true. That's very true. But so if we're going to use Star Wars as a context, Mandalorian season 1, 2, and 3, they all wrap up, don't they? And they're part of a bigger story. But each in Andor, same thing. every season, it still wraps up the main stuff. We can just move on from this because I'm sure I'm driving everybody crazy, but I of course know and appreciate that it's a part of a larger lore. And Rosario Dawson even joked at Celebration Europe, wouldn't it be cool if there was a season 2? I mean, of course you would sort of think there would be something. Let me ask you this. I said this to Mason. He was like, Dad, it's got to be this way. Would you like to see the story continue in animation, live action, or both?
I'm up for whatever they want to do it in. I would, at this point, I would hope to see it in live action still, because I really enjoy this entire cast. Obviously the tragic hurdle of having to find a new Baylan Skoll makes it difficult. But if someone can do that, I'm guessing the people that got this cast together in the first place would be capable of doing that. But, Ray Stevenson just made his mark on the Star Wars universe forever, and it was such an amazing performance. And, there better be books about his background that come out of this. But I love the live action and what they've done with it. And I love how the directors have done it. I love how Filoni wrote it. And they take some risks, and I appreciate the risks that they've taken as well.
Me too. And honestly, I think most of my frustration lies to the fact that I don't get to see Ray Stevenson finish out Baylan's arc. I think that's honestly where this is coming from, which has nothing to do with anything. When everybody made this, they didn't have any idea naturally. So maybe that's kind of where my melancholy comes from.
But it's still like your argument makes sense on a lot of that, Dan. So I don't think there's any wrong to this. Like there's
right.
We're all absorbing it different ways.
To me, this finale implies that there has to be more. Now, when get more, I think, is the issue because of the writer's strike, everything has gotten pushed back. I mean, Dave Filoni, in theory, only just this week is able to start writing again. Right? We don't know how far along the scripts were for the show, or if they had started pre-production or anything like that for what continues after what we've already seen. But I feel like, so it might be a while, but to me, you don't make the story like this if you don't know that there's going to be more. Right. And I think we know that there's a Mandoverse film coming eventually. I think it was originally supposed to be, I want to say 2025, but now it's 2026, I think, theoretically, or something like it was in that originally announced in that range. Who knows how that's going to change, obviously. But I do think that this needs to keep going in live action. Would I love to see spin-off animated shows? Yes, at 100%. Like let's see the Baylan and Shin animated series from before this. I would absolutely watch that. Like, what mercenary jobs did they have? How did they meet? Right? Like, I have all these questions about them.
That'd be cool.
And they clearly are the most provocative sort of like new characters in the show.
Right. Until they weren't.
Right. Well, no, it's to be continued. Where like this is my point about television, is that back in the days of network television, a cliffhanger sort of like this would be pretty standard. And I think we've become less okay with being hanging in the balance as viewers because of the way that streaming series have evolved, especially in Marvel and Star Wars.
That's a great point. Remember at the well, maybe you don't, but when Bobby Ewing suddenly appears at the end of Dallas, and he's like, "Wait, what?" Yeah, that was such a big deal, and there was no internet speculation the way that it is now. I read a great thing too about the challenge with enjoying a show like this, and it's like, why do fans get disappointed? Because I want to go on record, I'm not disappointed. I'm just a little disparaged. But this is, why do people get discouraged by this? And ultimately they came to the conclusion that people want things to be familiar and predictable so that they can critique it and discuss it. And otherwise it pushes sort of the boundaries of what they expect the story to be. And that's one of the reasons why I always thought and still think The Last Jedi is a stone cold masterpiece, because it takes those conventions and extrapolates them into a whole new area, which I really like. I would like to see an animated an animated miniseries showing Ahsoka and Sabine training and showing us why because I want to hear Ashley Eckstein. I want to hear Tia Sircar. I want to hear the original animated cast doing this. And just seeing, so we can actually kind of get more of the payoff, because even though we hear the stories and we see Sabine disgruntled in the first episode, there's really not a ton of tension between them. But the resolution is quite lovely. It would just be nice to get a little bit more of that backstory. A Baylan Shin thing would be terrific. Here's something though, and I want to ask you about this before as we wrap. Well, before I get to that, Hera and Ezra reunite as this Chopper. Sort of walk me through your emotions of that. And Jen, let's start with you.
So this was, to me, was the ultimate resolution, right? We got Ezra home. To me, that transcended everything else that was kind of going on. And there's so much that we haven't even talked about that happens in this episode. Sabine force pushes Ezra onto the Chimera.
Oh, we'll get to that too.
Okay. And so I feel like it was so cathartic. And just the way he says "I'm home" in a very kind of humble way, and the way that Chopper just like runs out in front of them, being like, "What's wrong with you people? Like, like why are we pointing guns?" And again, I'm gonna go back to, I believe it's still from the same essay on fairy stories. Tolkien coins this term called eucatastrophe, and he uses the adjective form eucatastrophic. Or catastrophic, I guess. And it's this idea that it's a catastrophic event, but one that has an uplifting, happy ending. And like euphoric and catastrophic combined, I guess, is probably what it is. And I feel like that's what this is, right? Because yes, Sabine and Ahsoka get stranded on Peridea. Thrawn gets away. In that sense, they failed. But the moment of Ezra getting home really does make you feel like Sabine, and I would not have said this at the beginning of the season, that Sabine made the right choice, and that Ezra really is, they're going to need him, right? You get the sense that he's an essential, even more so than Ahsoka. And I say that, loving Ahsoka very much, like maybe he was supposed to be with Hera and the New Republic during this time, and he's actually going to be a better fit for what they need to do versus even Ahsoka right now.
It could be. Ross?
I thought it was a poor wardrobe choice by Ezra to keep the helmet on to walk out. So there's that.
But such a good callback.
Dramatic.
They're building the tension.
It's a good Rebels callback.
Yeah. So it was fun, where I was just like, "Oh, you idiot! Take off the helmet." But then just that moment with Chopper and Ezra putting his hand on him, and it was just like you couldn't see him, but you felt the disbelief that must have been going through Ezra as he's putting his hand on Chopper again. And that was amazing, seeing Mary Elizabeth Winstead, her Hera, and the emotion that's coming out of her, where she's frozen. She can't even move to run over and give a hug or anything. She just sits there with Ezra with the question mark. And then he's just so basic with, how he says, "Hi, Hera, I'm home." And it all it needed to be was that simple.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. I wanted Ezra to hug Chopper like Poe Dameron does to BB-8, but that was okay. That was just pretty neat for them. The only thing I wish I could have seen Hera and Ezra embrace, like we got to see with Sabine and Ezra, or with Ahsoka and Ezra. And I'm always like that. I think I talked about this in a previous Coffee with Kenobi, or maybe it was on Prover. But whenever there's an emotional moment in the Harry Potter books and they don't hug when they're leaving, I was like, "Oh, come on, maybe I'm just a big hugger." But But I mean, it's kind of neat that they gave it like a private moment for them. But boy, was it was beautiful. It was really satisfying.
The pause and kind of the stillness, the frozenness that Ross just mentioned, I think really emphasizes how game changing this is.
Yes.
For the story going forward, right? The fact that Ezra is back on the board.
Yes.
Is, to continue our chess metaphor. But
it's great. And I really like the idea that Luke Skywalker is out there too, because boy, would that be awesome to see. It would have been nice to see Zeb at some point, but again, there are more stories to be told. Let's talk about Sabine. Now I've said a lot that she just doesn't have the Force. Hu Yang was pretty adamant about that. Well, she does. Ross, how do you like Sabine taking on the mantle of now a Jedi? And what did you think about the evolution of that aspect of the story?
I preferred her as a Vandal, but seeing as I didn't get any spray painting this entire episode, I will take her as a Jedi. And I think
the whole series.
Yeah, it is. She has come along.
When we come back to season 2, the Noti are going to be all dolled up, I think.
Right, and maybe her lightsaber will have like the other part will be like spray paint possible.
Yeah, the drab colors shaking are out of there.
Yeah.
But I'm happy of the path of Sabine. If she's going to become a Jedi, this was the right way to do it. And I tend to not have Jedi as my favorite character. So it is a learning curve for me, but again, I welcome that. I want to be challenged as a fan as well. So I appreciate this. But what I loved, we got so many awesome parts with Sabine and Ahsoka during this, and Sabine and Ezra sassing back and forth, like to the point where I think I laughed out loud maybe. But what
She's
I loved,
like, what's your excuse?
Yeah, that was great. That was a great
so
line.
awesome. But when Ahsoka asked her if she's been keeping up her training, and Sabine said, "I try," and then kind of did a smile, and it's like, I do.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like, oh, what a great nod to Yoda.
That was fun.
And just building those little elements in that I'm sure it's Filoni's writing throughout this entire season, putting those little gems right in there. So we're getting mini Kyber crystal just hidden right within the words that we get to hear the whole time. But Sabine and her growth, we talked about Ahsoka saying earlier, I'm going to be there for you. And for her at Ahsoka's moment of fear and being alone to say, you're not alone. And to be able to turn the tide against Morgan and those night troopers, that was awesome. I love seeing it. And I think that's their moment. Like that's their bond is completely filled now. It's completely cohesive.
There's some great fight sequences in this entire thing. And I appreciate that, what you're saying about Sabine. Now, I'm inclined to agree with you. I prefer Sabine just being a Mando, and because she doesn't need it. I'm not going to, wail and gnash my teeth about it. I think it's fine. If you would have asked me, do you want Sabine to be a Jedi? I mean, no, I don't. But I don't. It doesn't bother me. I think she was fine the way that she was before. But I trust Dave Filoni. It's his character, and I know that he knows how to tell a good story. And I just love watching Sabine. Sabine is my favorite character in this series. From the very first episode, I think she's terrific. And I like the sort of the construction of how it happens. She did get very, very powerful very quickly. But I kind of like this idea of like Spider-Man 2, where there's like a sort of a mental block. And a lot of doubt because her master, Ahsoka, doubted her. So maybe she sort of doubted that aspect of herself too. And Hu Yang did not make the confidence go flying through the stratosphere by any stretch of the imagination. So from that perspective, I like the idea that it's sort of suppressed for a really, really long time. And then it's able to kind of let itself go and be free. But again, as you mentioned, it's not my favorite aspect of this entire thing. but I'll see where it goes.
To me, it made a lot of sense, and I can I understand why some folks are sort of saying it happened too quickly, right? We were more expecting a shaky teacup as opposed to grabbing a lightsaber and force pushing Ezra all the way across to another ship. But to me, it makes sense in the context of sort of the fantasy trope of like when someone has powers that they haven't quite understood or have control over. I'm thinking mostly of Harry Potter, I think. That it comes out under moments of duress. Like that's when it's the most powerful. Yeah. And to me, that's sort of how you can explain, if you need to, you can explain why she's able to all of a sudden do this, because it's sort of like she's under threat. And I agree with both of you that she's really primed for this because Ahsoka has kind of made peace with her choice and has said, I'm going to support you no matter what happens next. Right. And we've all made difficult choices, etc. So that's given her confidence. And then also I think Ezra is huge for her in her development as a Jedi, because the fact that they're reunited and he just has this, I think I wrote in my review last week, the phrase unconditional trust, right? He just is like, no matter what, okay, sure. He has nothing that tells him that she's going to be able to push him, right? He's not seen any evidence that will give him confidence in that. Yeah. And so the fact that she says, I can do this. And he says, okay. Right. Like that. He just agrees and doesn't say, well, maybe we should try something else. Right. He doesn't try to talk right over. He just trusts her in that moment. I think makes all the difference in terms of whether or not she's able to do it.
That's great. Yeah. I think that and the psychological block and it's going to work because, well, we don't really have another option. This is what we've been given. And Sabine is so intriguing anyway. And I said to Mason, no, if this happens, she'll only be the second Mandalorian ever to be a Jedi. And that's pretty cool. Is there anything about this story we want to share before we give our letter grades?
I wanted to ask what you made about the end. With meaning what is Ahsoka and Sabine, what are they sensing when we're at the Nodi camp? And then we see, we haven't mentioned Force Ghost Anakin. Okay. Do you think they're both sensing Anakin though? Okay.
I do. I mean, if she has become more in tune with her Force abilities that were very latent and now have appeared, I think it's purely sensing Anakin. But my one question is, does Ahsoka see Anakin or does she kind of sense him and then smile and turn away? I kind of think she doesn't see him, but she feels his presence.
Yeah, I think they both feel his presence and it isn't there. And it goes back to Ahsoka connecting with Sabine last episode.
Yep.
While Ahsoka's still in space. And that was the moment of, oh, wait a second. I feel something now. And that's just kind of unlocked it. And then it was the floodgates opened when they had their moment on the plane or on the wing of saying like, hey, this is all in the right spot. Something else that I would want to say, I believe we saw Mirai, the Condor.
Yes.
So, and that is potentially the life force of the daughter.
Right.
So we have Balin is up with the enormous Argonothian statue from Lord of the Rings that is the father. And then we have the daughter. Where's the son?
Well, the son's there. The son, a statue. I know what you mean. The son statue is there. The daughter statue does not exist.
So I went back and looked, and the daughter statue is there, but her head has fallen. Like the boulder that presumably is her head has fallen off. So her body is on the left.
Right.
Which I didn't catch the first time. I had to go back and look. But yeah, that's the thing. It's like I was screaming at my screen, being like, Mortis gods, oh my goodness, Mariah's here. What is going on? And then my husband next to me is just like, what is happening? And then I'm like, well, there's this arc in the Clone Wars and I had to explain the whole thing. And he's like, oh, I kind of remember watching those with you. And I was like, okay, like that's what this is. And he was like, I didn't really pick up on that at all. So But
Interesting.
yeah, we don't speculate. This is killing me that we can't speculate about what this means.
You can. I just might mute your microphone. Just kidding. Let's give our letter grades and last minute thoughts on this, Jen.
So I landed at A-. It's a very high A- though, because when I think about all the things that we got in this individual episode, right? Like, Mortis Gods, Morai, Sabine finally uses the Force. We didn't even really talk about Stormtrooper zombies. Amazing. And Hu Yang helps Ezra make a light. Like, if you listed all the things that we saw in this episode, I would be like, no way. Like, that can't all happen in one episode. And yet it did. So that's why I want to go high. But the thing that's bringing me down is the thing we sort of talked about earlier of that we didn't get, we didn't get enough. Like, just having the Mortis God statues in the background is not enough of a clue as to what Balin's arc has been working towards this whole time. And I think we did, to have a more satisfying end to the season and have this be a better finale, I think Balin and Shin really did have to play a bigger role. And just the fact that we see just little bits of them at the end, I think was the one. And so usually I go A- with student papers because generally it's great. But if there's one major criticism, one thing I can sort of point to be like, well, that could have been better, then usually that's where something ends up in the A- range. So that's how I landed there.
I love it, and I love that explanation. Ross?
Yeah, and I don't know, how does the grading scale work at USC? So I have a 93. Am I an A or an A-?
In my class, it would be an A.
Okay, so
in 92 would be A-.
So I am just a shade above you then. But a 93 for a lot of the same reasons that you mentioned. Like, it is so awesome in so many ways. Far from perfect. But I loved it. And I love what it sets up for. And the only other thing that I'll put out there is the name that has stuck with me the most after seeing this is Lor San Tekka. And go check out the San Tekka clan and how they became famous. And I will leave it at that.
Ooh, cliffhanger.
That's a cliffhanger.
That is a good cliffhanger. Do you have some recommended reading for us for that?
Well, you can honestly just Google Lor San Tekka and see some of his stuff, but he has taken place. He starts the sequel trilogy, and that's who Poe goes to.
That's right.
He is an explorer and a parishioner of the Church of the Force, but his family mapped the hyperspace lanes, and that's how they became so big back in the time leading up to the High Republic. So we might need to get some people back from Peridia, and how does that happen? So who knows? That's just a path to look at there, and that would also be an amazing tie into the films. But I'm probably right 1 out of every 10,000 things that I look at. So he may have nothing to do with it, but I think that's a very curious approach and something that I haven't been able to get out of my head.
Maybe the Nihil will show up and take him. This is a hard one for me because I think, even though I've done a really good job over the years of trying to suppress it, I think my expectations, I just had a hard time containing them. It was like, if you shake up that soda enough, eventually the bubbles are going to burst to the top. And I think that's what I was like. I'm going to give it a B+. This is the first episode of the entire series that didn't get an A in some way, shape, or form for me. As much as I love the things that Jen pointed out, Ezra is great. There's a lot of wonderful things. I think Rosario Dawson continues to show that she is just a terrific choice to be Ahsoka Tano in live action. She's been terrific. Rest in peace to one of her really super cool white lightsabers, but she still got one. But the reason it's a B+ is because I think, again, the construction of the narrative, you can still leave a lot of room for story and hints to future paths of greatness, but you got to wrap things up and do justice to the characters. And I think that didn't happen here, and that makes me sad. I wish I didn't feel that way, but you know me, I'm gonna, again, when you say no, it makes your yes mean a lot more as a critic or just as just a fan, and that's just sort of where I am at with this.
Do you think if we had gotten more episodes in the season, that you could have gotten the resolution that you were hoping for?
Or
is it a function of it's too compact? The season's too compact. You know what I mean? Because that's the complaint. It's more with Marvel than Star Wars that I've heard this complaint. But that because they've shrunken the season size down, it's really limiting. So you have to either really rush through the storytelling, or you don't get to tell enough story.
I think so. I still think if we would have ended this season with Ahsoka and Hu Yang and the Purgils flying off into hyperspace in search of Sabine, and then we got 6 episodes of season 2, I think that probably would have scratched that itch. But just him standing on a rock isn't enough, because we got a lot of great stuff before that. We shall see.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
I can promise you this, though. If the two of you are interested in when Ahsoka season 2 comes out, I hope that the two of you will share this journey with me, because this whole experience has been completely magnified and enriched because of the two of you. And I actually have an iTunes review here that I want to share with you both. And it says, let me click on the actual full review here. It says, truly, this is a review on Apple Podcasts. It says, Coffee and Charm, 5 stars. Truly incredible, really deep dives, mythological, philosophical, cinematic. Analysis of Ahsoka are even better than the episodes of Coffee with Kenobi. This is why the cinema today is missing. This is what the cinema today is missing. Precious reviews and critics such as Coffee with Kenobi. If we learn how to watch, especially in Star Wars fandom, great things will happen. And this is a place to learn. Kudos. And this is from Yasarillo. That was left on September 26th. So thank you so much. And that review doesn't happen without the two of you sharing your insights. So thank you for elevating Coffee with Kenobi. I truly, truly appreciate you sharing your time and talents, and of course, both of your friendships.
Yeah, Dan, it's awesome. Like, this has been a blast. I have looked forward to it every episode that we get to do. I know that Jen and I text a little on the side, and then we're also in the bigger text group as well, where that just becomes, that's the narrative. And that is us caring about this and wanting to spend the time and deep diving and knowing how much you respect Lucasfilm, storytelling, myth, all of those elements. Like, we need to come prepared each time knowing that you have set that standard. So thank you for the invite, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
That's very kind of you, buddy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, same for me. I think, first of all, it's been pure joy doing this every week. And it's enhanced my own experience and engagement with the series 100%. And I think, we've agreed, we've disagreed, we've laughed a lot. It's just been everything I could have hoped for. And hopefully I didn't bore everybody with Academic Corner. It sounds like I didn't based on their review, so that's good. But it's, this is just a character that is so important to me. And so being able to sort of like talk through this series and offer kind of that perspective has been the opportunity of a lifetime. And can we get Dave Filoni on the phone to be like, can you speed up season 2 so we can do this again?
Yes, I will text him right after the show. That's so good. Well, thank you again both so very, very much. You did not bore us on Academic Corner. It was great. I actually quoted you, one of your sources in a grad school paper I worked on recently. So, no, I appreciate it.
Nice.
So, Jen, please let everybody know. Obviously, they will want to continue to hear your insights, not only on Star Wars, but film and storytelling in general. Where can people find you?
You can find my writing.
Are you going to stand on a stone stab you and just disappear into the ether.
Right.
Well, it's of
Right,
me.
you're
I
gonna-
just have a little crown on to go with my beard.
Yes, that goes from your beard.
You can only find my reviews via Purgle. And they're lost in another galaxy called Substack. So you can go to the longtake.substack.com. I've been doing weekly reviews of Ahsoka. So if you've enjoyed the snippets of academic stuff that I've brought in, there's a 15 to 20 minute reads worth of stuff like that in my reviews, because that was sort of like that. And this podcast was so good for my writing too. I want to say thank you, Dan, for that, because every week I would sort of sit down and be like, okay, we got all of the sort of general criticism and discussion out of the way. Now what? And then it really pushed me to kind of go deeper in a way that I hadn't before with other shows. So that's been wonderful. And you can also, look forward to Loki. It's starting. I can't believe we don't even get a week break. Like, it's starting on Thursday. I'm not ready. And so I'm going to be doing weekly breakdowns of that as well. And then there's a companion podcast called the Long Take Review, which is a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. We just recently did an episode on Gareth Edwards, the creator. And it was a great time with P.T. McNiff and Greg Cass, who's a friend of both friends of the show. So thank you.
And Ross, where can people reach out to you? And yes, not only are you a massive expert in Star Wars and cinema and sports, especially the NFL, but you also have an incredible music podcast too. Please let everybody know where they can find all of your talents.
Yeah, so look for me on Instagram, Album Cockpit Podcast. And that is where we discuss albums. It has taken the Ahsoka hiatus, and I'm probably going to take a week or two and recover after Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got some great guests lined up, some from within the Star Wars podcast universe, some completely outside of it, but try to hit a diverse range of albums, different time periods, different genres. Why do people love them? Authentic storytelling is the best. Music helps bring that out of people. So you can find the podcast on Spotify, and you can only listen there because the music is included. So you get to hear the songs. So they are long episodes, but I think they're worth it. And I think along with that, you can find Jen and I on fanthatracks.com. So with reviews, I'll probably end up starting to write a little bit more. And I've shown up on Fanthatracks TV a couple times recently too.
Yes, you have.
That's been fun to build that out with Brian Cameron. And thank you, Mark Newbold, for that. And then the only other thing that I'll add, Dan, you make this incredible. Jen, you do. But our card squadron, Greg, Mary, Frank, Amy, LJ, Colby, Tom, Chaz, and especially Emo 1. You guys, you make it worth doing this, and you make it fun every single day. So go Star Wars, go CWK fam, and thank you so much.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.